Emily sat on the edge of the reception chair, her palms damp against the folder holding her resume. This interview wasn't just a chance, it was her lifeline. Months of rejections had chipped away at her confidence, and she knew landing this role could mean finally standing on her own 2 feet. When the receptionist called her name, Emily rose, smoothed her skirt, and forced a smile. But the moment she pushed open the glass door to the interview room, her breath caught in her throat. There, at the head of the panel, sat her older sister, Claire. Claire, immaculately dressed as always, leaned back in her chair with a smirk that was all too familiar. The same smirk she wore when she accidentally revealed Emily's secrets at family dinners, when she dismissed her dreams as childish, when she treated her as nothing more than the little sister who'd never measure up. Emily's stomach sank. Of all places, of all people. Claire tapped her pen against the table. Well, she said coolly, her eyes narrowing. Didn't expect to see you here. The other panel members shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension but not yet understanding it. Emily stood frozen for a second, a dozen memories flooding back, of being overshadowed, silenced, belittled. But then she drew in a breath. She couldn't crumble now. Not here. Not when so much was at stake. With quiet determination, she stepped forward, offered a polite smile, and said, "Thank you for the opportunity. I'm ready to begin." The battle lines were drawn. The room felt colder than it was. Emily sat across the long table, her resume neatly placed before her, while Claire flipped through the pages with exaggerated slowness, as though searching for flaws to spotlight. "So," Claire began, her tone sharp enough to slice the air, "you've had quite a patchy employment history." She raised her brows, the smirk returning. "Care to explain why you couldn't seem to hold a job for more than a year?" Emily's throat tightened. She wanted to defend herself, to explain that it wasn't incompetence but circumstance, that layoffs, family emergencies, and a relentless economy had all played their part. Instead, she swallowed hard and answered calmly, "Each role taught me something valuable, and I'm proud of the resilience it gave me." Claire chuckled, low and mocking. "Resilient, huh? That's one way to put it." She leaned forward. "But tell me, Emily, what makes you think you could handle a company of this scale when you couldn't even handle smaller ones?" The panelists exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't a professional interview anymore, it felt personal, almost cruel. Yet Emily kept her voice steady, refusing to let her sister see her break. Inside, though, her heart was racing. Why is she doing this? Why here? Just then, a subtle shift occurred. At the end of the table, a man who had been quiet until now leaned slightly forward. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, piercing, thoughtful, were fixed on Emily. Unbeknownst to her, this was no ordinary executive. It was Ryan, the CEO of the company, and her fiancé. Claire, too absorbed in her game of one-upmanship, hadn't noticed the weight of his silence, or that the trap she thought she'd set for Emily was about to snap back on her. The air in the room grew heavier with each cruel question Claire fired. Emily kept answering with quiet strength, but she could feel her chest tightening, her hands trembling beneath the table. Claire leaned back in her chair, clearly enjoying herself. "You see, Emily," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "this company requires someone exceptional. Someone polished. I'm not sure you're cut out for it. Maybe you should consider something simpler." Emily felt the sting, but before she could respond, a calm, steady voice cut through the tension. "I think I've heard enough." The panel turned. The man at the end of the table, silent until now, rose from his chair. His presence seemed to command the entire room. Claire blinked, her smirk faltering. Emily's heart stopped. "Ryan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. There he stood, Ryan, her fiancé. Dressed in a sharp suit, carrying himself with the authority of someone who didn't need to prove who he was. For weeks, he'd kept the details of his position private, telling Emily only that he worked in management. She had never once suspected he was the CEO, the very top of the ladder. Claire's jaw fell open. Wait, you're the CEO, she stammered, her face paling. Ryan's eyes, usually warm, were cool now, fixed firmly on Claire. I sat here today to observe, he said evenly. To see how candidates were treated. What I witnessed was not an interview. It was an attack. The room was silent. The panelists shifted nervously, unsure whether to speak. Claire tried to recover, stuttering excuses. I was just being thorough. I didn't mean. Ryan held up a hand, silencing her. Then he turned to Emily, his expression softening. And yet, despite everything, you remained calm. Collected. Graceful. That says more about your strength than any resume ever could. Emily's eyes welled with tears, not of shame this time, but of something deeper. Relief. Vindication. And for the first time in her life, Claire's smirk was gone. Claire sat stiffly, her confidence shattered, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. The silence in the room pressed in like a storm cloud. She fumbled with her pen, trying to find words, but nothing came. Emily looked at her sister, really looked at her. Behind the arrogance and cruelty, she saw something else, fear. The same fear she had glimpsed years ago when Claire first took a job in the corporate world, desperate to prove she was more than just the pretty, perfect daughter. Emily could have seized this moment for revenge. She could have exposed Claire's bitterness in front of everyone, could have humiliated her the way she had been humiliated. For a brief second, the temptation lingered. But then Emily's heart softened. She took a slow breath, her voice calm but steady. Claire, she said gently, this was never about whether I was good enough. This has always been about you not believing you are. The words landed with weight. The panelists looked at one another, startled by the honesty, the grace. Claire's eyes flickered, anger giving way to something rawer, hurt, maybe even shame. Her lips parted, but no defense came. Emily leaned forward slightly, her tone still warm. I don't want to compete with you. I never did. I just want to build something for myself. And I hope, one day, you'll see that tearing others down doesn't make you stronger, it just leaves you lonelier. The room was utterly still. Even Ryan, who had come ready to defend her, stood silent, watching as Emily chose a path far more powerful than retaliation. For the first time in years, Emily wasn't the little sister in her sister's shadow. She was a woman standing firmly in her own light, kind, strong, and unshaken. The interview room hung in silence, every eye fixed on Emily. She had not raised her voice, had not lashed out, yet the weight of her words lingered like a quiet echo that no one could ignore. Ryan stepped toward her, pride softening his features. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder and turned to the stunned panel. This, he said firmly, is what leadership looks like. Not just intelligence or experience, but compassion. The ability to stay steady under fire, and the courage to respond with dignity rather than cruelty. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. The panelists nodded, clearly moved. Claire sat frozen, her face pale, her pen now still against the notepad. For once, she wasn't smirking, wasn't posturing. She looked smaller somehow, as though her armor of superiority had finally cracked. Emily, instead of gloating, simply gave her sister a soft, almost forgiving glance. It was a look that said, I don't hate you. I hope you find peace. Ryan turned back to Emily with a smile. You're not just hired, he said, his voice steady but warm. You're exactly the kind of person this company, and this world, needs leading the way. Emily's breath hitched. After years of doubt, of being underestimated and overshadowed, she finally felt seen, not just by Ryan, but by herself. As she left the interview room, her head was high, her steps firm. She hadn't just won a job. She had reclaimed her voice, her worth, and her power. Claire remained seated, eyes lowered, lost in thought. For the first time, perhaps, she was forced to confront the truth. That strength wasn't found in tearing her sister down, but in learning how to rise herself. And Emily? She walked out into the bright afternoon sun with Ryan by her side, a smile tugging at her lips. Her journey hadn't been about proving her sister wrong. It had been about proving to herself that kindness, even when it costs, is the greatest strength of all.